following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome to this Friday edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Our focus continues to be on the Israel-Hamas war. Israel has agreed to put in place 4-hour daily humanitarian pauses in its assault on Hamas in northern Gaza. That statement was issued by the White House on Thursday as President Joe Biden pressed Israelis for a multi-day stoppage in the fighting in a bid to negotiate the release of hostages held by the terror group. Biden had asked Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to institute the daily pauses during a Monday phone call and said he had also asked the Israelis for a pause of at least 3 days to allow for hostage negotiations. In fact, Biden told reporters it had taken a little longer than he had hoped for Israel to agree to the humanitarian pauses. White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said the Israelis had committed to announcing each 4-hour window at least 3 hours in advance. Israel, he said, also was opening a second corridor for civilians to flee the areas that are the current focus of its military campaign against Hamas. Israeli officials estimate that Hamas is still holding some 240 hostages, including children and the elderly, from the 7th October attack that saw 1,400 people killed in Israel. The Israeli counteroffensive that started the same day has seen well over 11,000 people killed in Gaza, according to the health ministry in the Hamas-run territory. And they say that at least 4,500 of the victims were children. A massive humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding in Gaza as basic supplies run out and wounded people overwhelm a fragile medical system. And here's something equally important. US officials believe the death toll in Gaza may well be much higher than the official figure that has been reported by the Hamas-run health ministry. That is what US Assistant Secretary of State Barbara Leaf told a US House panel on Thursday. Leaf said, and I quote, "We think the figures are very high, frankly, and it could be that they're even higher than what is being cited. This is very possible," she said. Israeli officials, on the other hand, have challenged the ministry's figures as exaggerated. Not only that, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said far too many Palestinians have died. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in his latest interview to Fox News, has said, "We don't seek to conquer Gaza, we don't seek to occupy Gaza, and we don't seek to govern Gaza." Earlier this week, Netanyahu had set the cat among the pigeons when he suggested in another interview that Israel would be responsible for Gaza's security indefinitely, drawing pushback from the United States, Israel's main ally. And now consider this. The Biden administration has received stark warnings from American diplomats in the Arab world that its strong support for Israel's destructive and deadly military campaign in Gaza is losing the US Arab support for a generation. This is according to a diplomatic cable that underscores profound concern among American officials about the growing anger against the United States that erupted soon after Israel launched its operations against Hamas following the terror group's attacks on Israel on the 7th of October. The cable from the US Embassy in Oman reads, "We are losing badly on the messaging battle space," citing conversations with a wide range of trusted and sober-minded contacts. The robust US support for Israel's actions is being seen, the cable says, as material and moral culpability in what they consider to be possible war crimes. Another cable that's been reported by CNN International from the American Embassy in Cairo, which conveys Egypt's view, says, "President Biden's cruelty and disregard for Palestinians has exceeded all previous US presidents." President Biden has been under growing pressure domestically and abroad over US support of Israel amid images of destruction in Gaza and the dire humanitarian crisis in the region. In another development, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has issued a statement saying the Palestinian Authority, which is in charge of the West Bank, can take control of Gaza, but only under a broader agreement. The question we're focusing on tonight is this: will The so-called humanitarian pauses in fighting that have been agreed upon really help to ease the excruciating pain of the Palestinians trapped in Gaza and living in an unimaginable nightmare.
Our forces in Gaza are at the heart of Gaza City. They are at the outskirts of Shati. They are near Shifa Hospital and very near to the Gaza port. Those terrorists who are staying in the basements under Shifa Hospital tonight can hear the thundering sound of tank chains. The bulldozers that pound the ground, they can hear it underground. They hear it the trouble with fear. The IDF has started employing new methods these days against those inside the tunnels and to destroy the tunnels. It will improve in the coming days. All our forces are working to find unique solutions for these tasks, working and succeeding.
President Macron, thank you for hosting this conference. We are here to support civilians in Gaza. Of course, nothing justifies the abhorrent acts of terror by Hamas in Israel on 7 October, which I utterly condemned. Israelis and others were brutally killed or abducted, and I call once again for the unconditional return of all hostages. Now, civilians in Gaza, including children and women, face a never-ending humanitarian nightmare. Their neighborhoods wiped out, their loved ones killed, bombs raining down while being denied life's very basics: food, water, medicine, electricity. Some life-saving aid is beginning to trickle into Gaza, but let's face it, it's a drop in the ocean. The needs are enormous. We must step up to assist and protect civilians in Gaza. That means an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. It means ensuring full respect of international humanitarian law. It means protecting hospitals, UN facilities, shelters, and schools. It means unfettered, safe, and sustained access to bring and distribute supplies at much greater scale, volume, and frequency, including fuel. And it means investing in the $1.2 billion humanitarian appeal that the United Nations has just launched to help the people of Gaza. I urge your support. Now is the time for concrete action. Together, we can help ease this terrible human suffering. We can help civilians in Gaza see at last, and at the very least, a glimmer of hope, a sign of solidarity, and a signal that the world sees their plight and cares enough to act.
After 4 weeks of bombardment and shelling by Israeli forces in Gaza, the indiscriminate effects of such weapons in a densely populated area is clear. Israel must immediately end the use of such methods and means of warfare, and the attacks must be investigated. So I appeal as a matter of urgency for Israeli authorities to take immediate measures, to take steps to ensure the protection of Palestinians in the West Bank, who are being on a daily basis subjected to violence from Israeli forces and settlers, ill treatment, arrests, evictions, intimidation, and humiliation. There's also been a sharp increase in settler violence and takeover of land across the West Bank. Since 7 October, nearly 1,000 Palestinians from at least 15 herding communities have been forced from their homes. In the context of the coercive environment they live in, the displacement of these communities may amount to the forcible transfer of a population, which is a grave breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention.
People die of everything in Gaza. They die of severe injuries, of burn, of being crushed by crumbling buildings by the hundreds. They also die of acute and chronic diseases, even common ones, which have known remedies but which they don't have access to because of blockade. They die of complications related to difficult childbirth. Finally, they die in pain, without analgesic and without anesthesia. In fact, Gaza has become a giant open-air cemetery.
All right, so Israel has finally agreed to daily 4-hour pauses in fighting. What does this really mean for the war and for the Palestinians in Gaza? Let's dissect this with our guests. We are joined by 3 guests from Israel tonight. I have with me on Global Lens tonight Ambassador Arthur Lenk, former Israeli diplomat. Also with us, Colonel Myri Eisen, Director, International Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University in Israel. Annette Bernstein, President of the Israel-Asia Chamber of Commerce, is also with us from Israel tonight. And in a moment, we're hoping to be joined by Major General Sanjay Meston, defense and geopolitical expert here in India. All right, Ambassador Arthur Lenk, let me start with you. Yes, Israel has finally agreed to daily 4-hour-long pauses in the fighting. But it is widely believed that not only has this been brokered by the United States, but that this has actually come on after considerable pressure was mounted on Israel by its closest ally, with President Biden no less going on record as to say, yes, I spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu and I told him that we need humanitarian pauses in this fighting. My question to you is, what do you think these pauses, if at all they are executed in the manner that they're meant to be, really mean for Israel's ongoing military campaign against Hamas? And of course, the question that many are also asking is, will it really ease the pain of the Palestinians? As we mentioned at the start of the show, more than 11,000 have now been killed in the Israeli counteroffensive.
Good evening, and thanks for having me with you. I think that we have this discussion is backwards. The reality is 5 weeks ago tomorrow, Hamas, thousands of Hamas fighters brutally, savagely attacked Israel, killed men, women, children. There was no humanitarian warning before that. The hostages that have been held for 5 weeks, babies, grandmothers, civilians, for the most part, are given no humanitarian leeway whatsoever. I don't understand how the massive, violent, terrorist attack of Hamas is pushed aside, and only Israel who is actually the victim here, is being seen as the aggressor. I can't imagine we're now 15 years after the 2008 Mumbai attacks this very month. Could you imagine in the middle of looking for the terrorists, there was a call for a humanitarian break so that the terrorists could resettle and reorganize and replan to continue on their war? No. Hamas has to give up the hostages. Hamas has to stop terrorizing its own people. Hamas has to stop fighting and stop existing. And in the meantime, Israel is obviously, as you well said, cooperating in humanitarian ways to keep innocent Palestinians out as best as possible.
With all due respect, Ambassador, there is one thing I'd like to say before I move on. You know, first and foremost, I assure you that none of us have forgotten about the massacre, the unprecedented butchery and barbarism that were displayed by Hamas when 1,400 innocent Israelis were killed on the 7th of October. We've done multiple shows right here on News9 Live talking about that. But when you remind us of how India has been a victim of terrorism as well, and who knows that better than the people here in this country, and you refer to 26/11, and I know that comparisons have been drawn. Many Israelis have said this is a 9/11. Some have drawn comparisons between 7th October and 26/11. But I would have to point out here to you, while of course there was a lot of anger and outrage and hurt here in India, but we did not bomb Pakistan back to the Stone Age in the aftermath of 26/11. I think let's be very clear about that. So I'm not sure we can really draw parallels here between Israel's response and India's response to 26/11. Let me now move on to our next guest. I will come back to you, Ambassador. Colonel Myri Eisen, let me start with you. You know, there are some intriguing reports that have emerged in the last 24 hours. And in fact, this isn't just a report. I'm quoting the US Assistant Secretary of State Barbara Leaf, who told a US House panel just yesterday, we think the death toll in Gaza is very high, and frankly, it could be much, much higher than what is being cited by the Hamas-controlled health ministry. This is very possible. So while on the one hand, Israel continues to express skepticism about the figures that are coming out of Gaza, the latest figures that we have today suggest that at least 11,200 Palestinians have been killed in the Israeli counter-offensive so far in the last 34 days, and More than 4,400 of them were children. And this is not me saying it, but a top US official saying the number is actually much higher than that. And there are reports now suggesting that even as the United States, your closest ally, continues to stand in your corner, President Biden is now under growing pressure both domestically and abroad, given that Israel's response is now being seen as not just a very aggressive one, but many are now beginning to characterize it as a war crime or even a genocide. These are not my words. I'm only talking about the criticism that is being leveled against Israel now, increasingly, including in the United States of America. How would you respond to that?
Neha, we've been having our discussions here over the last few weeks, and I really appreciate you bringing us here and talking and putting in this Israeli perspective. I think that, Neha, both of us are going to agree, as we're talking to each other, that war is terrible, that Hamas started a barbaric war, as you said before, as Ambassador before from Israel said. When you are in that war, the question is, how do you take that next stage? Can you imagine right now, which you can't in that sense, that I don't want to use Pakistan as an example. In this case, for us, our neighbor next door, whatever your neighbor is, over the last 15 years, built their entire system underneath 2.3 million people. How cruel can that be? Israel, and you said this before, is bombing. Neha, if we wanted to bomb the Gaza Strip out of existence, and I want the viewers to be clear that I'm being sarcastic, then we could have done so without sending in any ground troops. Why send in ground troops? Why send in soldiers that have been killed in this ground operation, if not to save lives? And you're absolutely right. Every civilian that dies is horrible. That's horrible for me. That's horrible for you. Do you know what that does to soldiers who are targeting terrorists, are trying to avoid the civilians, and those civilians are used as human shields? So I'm looking and I'm talking with you and I'm going, we need to make sure that a force, a terror force, an evil force like Hamas that built their entire defense system on the hostages that we're not talking about enough, because as before said, from age 9 months through age 87, and I know you've spoken with them extensively, but they're still there. It's 5 weeks. None of the Hamas have ever said anything about them, and it's as if that's like a side issue. They're holding our civilians. We are going in, and we are doing it systematically and slowly. It's kind of odd. They keep telling us, why are you doing it harshly? We're doing it slowly to save lives. If we wanted to bomb it out of existence in the way that you said before, then why send in soldiers? We want to save lives, save the hostages, and in this sense, and it is with hope, so that the people of the Gaza Strip can have a better future. Hamas is not going to give that future, and they need to be destroyed. This is a horrible war, and there's no easy way to do it.
There is no easy way to do it, and I think one thing that must be stated, and I've been trying to do that here on my show, is that this is a complex issue that should not be seen through the prism of any reductionist binaries. You know, you're either with us or against us. If you express any sympathy for the Palestinians and the children and the women who are being killed in Gaza, then you are instantly labeled as a Hamas apologist. You know, I think we have to understand. You know, I'm so glad you
acknowledge that.
I'm so glad you do, because unfortunately that's not how a lot of Israelis are looking at it. The moment you say something like that, you are labeled as an apologist for Hamas. Having been victims of terrorism ourselves for years and decades now, I can tell you that India is the last country that would be an apologist or a sympathizer for any terror organization in this world, least of all Hamas, given the kind of barbarism that they displayed. However, here, the problem really is, do we need to differentiate between Hamas, the terrorists, and innocent Palestinians who have been caught in this crossfire? Because as we speak, many of them are dying, many of them are lying wounded in hospitals that are out of operation, that cannot treat them because they do not have adequate medical supplies, they do not have fuel. It's a very, very complex situation, not to mention a nightmarish humanitarian disaster. Let me now go across to Anna Bernstein at this point. Ms. Bernstein, you know, Ambassador Arthur Leng said, I'm surprised that the world has forgotten what happened to Israel on the 7th of October. I assure you the world hasn't forgotten. We haven't forgotten what happened on the 7th of October. Not only was that terror attack unprecedented in your country's history, it is in many ways unprecedented globally in terms of its sheer magnitude and the cruelty that was involved. But let me say this to you here as an observer and as a journalist and as a disinterested party, that while there was a lot of sympathy and support for Israel in the immediate aftermath of the 7th October massacre, now close to 5 weeks later, what's happened is that the mood of the world has shifted because there are innocent people, including women and the elderly and children and little babies, who are dying on the other side as well. Like I mentioned at the start of the show, according to American officials, the death figure, the real death figure, is likely to be much higher than what is being cited by the Hamas-run health ministry. Therefore, I'm going to ask you this. How do you see this war panning out in the days ahead? How much longer do you think Israel will be able to withstand the growing international pressure for a ceasefire? The fact that the narrative is shifting, the fact that there is growing criticism of Israel. And while Israel on the 7th of October was most certainly the victim, today it is being seen in many quarters as the oppressor or as the aggressor. How is Israel going to deal with that? And do you believe these humanitarian pauses are really going to help ease the pain of the Palestinians who are trapped in the Gaza Strip?
Of course, those first, hi, Neha. Of course, those humanitarian pauses will ease the pain. And let me add that several hospitals are being built on the border with Egypt on the south of Gaza Strip. And that's where the civilians are being, and you can see in the pictures also, there is a convoy of civilians marching to the south. And who protects them? Have you seen the pictures of yesterday? Who protects them? The Israeli army, because Hamas was shooting at them when they tried to move to the south. So when you're talking about the numbers, which all of us really don't know what are the numbers, because who are the health authorities of Gaza? Hamas. Hamas is the government. Hamas rules the health authorities. So we really don't know, but we know that we are doing everything we can to make sure that civilians are not hurt. I'm a mom. No mom wants anyone, any civilian, any children to be hurt. And who are the soldiers? The soldiers are my sons, my husband, and I'm sure that they are sharing the values that I have. So Israel has the highest moral of any army in the world. So the numbers, we don't know, and if US said it or not, eventually the numbers come from Hamas. And let's also discuss the number of terrorists that are being killed. So leave alone the numbers. Now, when you're talking about, many spoke about proportionate, and look at the Hamas leaders being interviewed in the last few days, and they said very clearly, we will do it again. We will do it the 7th of October another time and another time until we eradicate Israel. And we are 10 million. So we need to protect ourselves. It's not something that we can do overnight. And I don't think that there is a pressure from the US. The Israel government and the US administration, Biden administration, are working hand in hand to manage this war. And Israel is collaborating and consulting with the US. So there will be, of course, a humanitarian pause, because if we need to allow a convoy of medicine or food or whatever, that's fine. And when you spoke about fuel that is not reaching. Well, 1 hour back, there was a rocket barrage on Israel, reaching Tel Aviv, reaching Rishon, reaching Ashdod. And for that, they have fuel, for that, they have electricity. So all those sympathy that the Hamas is trying to get from the world in order for putting pressure on Israel to stop it, it's a manipulation. In October 7th, they killed, tortured, raped, did all those barbaric things, but you're saying that they're not lying? Now they're innocent people? So please remember who is on the other side and understand that although there are casualties, but Israel is wanting to live in peace. We don't want another October 7th. We want to go back to our border. We don't want to occupy Gaza. It's just a headache for us. We really don't want it. But we need to make sure that Gaza will not be this camp of terror. Some people say that that's the largest terror camp in the world. We cannot live there then. You know that my house is 1 hour from the border. So then what? I need to live in fear that one night in the morning someone will shoot my door and kidnap me to Gaza? This is the life that I'm going to have? No, we are in a big threat when Hamas is there. It's about time for years, more than 15 years, we let Hamas rule Gaza and see what happened. See where we are now. We need to put this to an end. We need to eradicate Hamas, and we're doing it not just for us. We're doing it also for the Palestinians that need to live in peace, not under crazy terror organizations that kill their own people. And then then there will be peace in this region maybe one day. But before that, it will take some time. We don't want to do, as my colleague said, airstrike that will kill civilians. We'll do it slowly, and eventually there will be no Hamas, and Palestinians will be free of Hamas.
Okay, can you really achieve that, a scenario where there is no Hamas? Well, the jury on that is still out. But before I go across to our Indian guest, I would like to clarify one thing too, Ms. Bernstein, that, you know, when we say that there is now the sympathy of the world that's shifting, I can assure you it is not for Hamas. It is for the innocent Palestinians who are dying, who are getting wounded, who do not have basic essentials such as food, water and medicines. And I think it's very important that we draw this distinction between the Hamas terrorists and the innocent Palestinians who've been caught in the crossfire. So if I am expressing my sympathy today, as I did for the victims of the terror attacks in Israel, I can assure you I do not have any sympathy for any terrorist organization in the world, but yes, my heart does bleed for the innocent Palestinians, including the women and little children who've died there. We must draw that distinction. And since you talked about Hamas interviews and their propaganda, I would also like to place this on record here that in the last 5 weeks, I have interviewed a lot of Israelis, including former prime ministers. I have also had a lot of Palestinian voices on my show. I had the opportunity to interview members of Hamas. I chose not to put them on air. I chose not to give those terrorists a platform on my show. I just want you to be aware of that. Because terrorism is terrorism. We need to be very clear about that. And I don't think anybody is looking to justify what Hamas did, even in the remotest possible way. But let me now go across to Major General Sanjay Meston. General Meston, I have 2 questions for you. We just heard our Israeli guest say there will only be peace once Hamas has been finished. That is the stated objective of this war as far as Israel is concerned. Everyone, the Prime Minister downwards, has said that repeatedly. The question is that really even a realistic target that Israel is talking about, finishing off Hamas? I mean, we here in India have been victims of terrorism exported by Pakistan for decades now. You know, but we know how things work as far as terror organizations go. Secondly, I want your thoughts on this. CNN International has carried a very interesting story. It quotes diplomatic cables from the Middle East, some of which say that Americans are losing badly on the messaging battle space. It says that, you know, US's unstinting support for Israel is being seen as material and moral culpability in what many consider to be possible war crimes by Israel. And this is something that is likely to increasingly become a headache for President Joe Biden. What are your thoughts, sir, on these two aspects of this war?
Neha, good evening. Very pertinent questions. I've heard the Israeli guest also with patience. Now, first question you have raised is it a very realistic target of destroying Hamas? I think before I answer that, one has to analyze what does destruction imply. Because majority of the people feel destruction implies destruction of Hamas implies destroying every individual physically. No, that is not the meaning of destruction. I'll just take you back to Afghanistan, where I was posted as a defense attaché. When the Americans moved in after 9/11, their aim was very clear: find, fix, and finish Al Qaeda. Now, after 20 years, has Al Qaeda finished? The answer is to some extent yes. Now, what does that involve? That involves finishing the top leadership, the top hierarchy. In this case, bin Laden was finished off, you are aware, in Pakistan, and thereafter Al Zawahiri, who was the number two, was finished off. So, this is what, and even if you recollect, when the Indian Parliament was attacked, way back in 2001, our again stated objective was very, very clear that we were ready to go into a war during Op Prakram. And a stated objective by then the Home Minister, Mr. Advani, was that we have to destroy those 52 people. There were 52 names. Similarly, when the Americans had gone to Iraq, they had also, I think, given about 52 names. Now, these are all leadership names, not the entire cadre. So, when it involves destruction, destruction implies finishing of the top leadership, that is point one. Point two is the infrastructure, which I agree with the Israeli guest, because if you finish off this infrastructure of weaponry, the tunnels, everything, it will take years for Hamas to revive. And these are the two basic fundamentals. And what happens when these two things happen simultaneously? They are devoid of ammunition, they are devoid of everything. The fighting capabilities of the cadre, they actually take a beating, and then they get disorganized. They have no one to order them, and then they are just fighting as individuals. And thereafter, majority of them perhaps will die, or majority of them will even surrender, or they will be captured. I think the Israeli Defense Forces has also captured sizable people of Hamas. Now, if you see here, there's another very interesting thing. You know, as a military man, but leadership is always with its cadres. Now, in this case,
In
there is
this
a
case,
top
most of them are in Qatar, sir. Correct me if I'm
Yes,
wrong.
exactly. Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. Someone is in Qatar, someone is in Turkey. They have got such huge mansions, houses, staying in seven-star hotels. So, are they true leaders? As a soldier, as a general, I have to be with my soldiers. How can I be sitting somewhere else? Soldiers have to be associated with their cadre.
But, sir, in
And
all
therefore,
fairness, this is not a professional army we are talking about. This is a terror organization.
no, exactly. So now you look at the terrorism, these terrorists, they have just put their cadres and some senior people on the fighting battle, on the battlefront, and they are themselves in Qatar and Turkey and making all statements.
Yes.
So this is what I want to say. The destruction does not imply finishing of every individual. That will never happen. And as regards ideology is there. I think over a period of time, ideology will also change. If you now go back into history, 2011, Mahmoud Abbas, he made a very important, pertinent statement that after the adoption of the UN General Assembly 181 resolution, where it was decided that Israel will be declared as a state in 1947, it was decided, and I think it was May 1948 that they came into existence. The next day there was a war. Next very day, 5 Arab nations attacked them. That means they went against the United Nations General Assembly resolution. And Mohammed Abbas has recently stated in 2011 that the biggest mistake made was that why the Arabs then attacked Israel. If they wouldn't have attacked, I think everything would have been in order. And after that attack, if you recollect, Jordan was being managed, West Bank was being managed by Jordan. And who was managing Gaza? It was being managed by Egypt. So, Arab world has in fact been instrumental in dividing the Palestinians for a two, their
The
own state.
two-state solution. But you know, you're talking
Yeah,
about
exactly.
Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president. He's made an interesting statement today as well, and I want to discuss that with our Israeli guests. Ambassador Arthur Lenk, if I could come to you. Now, of course, critics of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu say that he and his far-right government in Israel have virtually made the two-state solution impossible, and that is what has led to a significant escalation of tensions in the region. Of course, I am not for a second condoning what happened on the 7th of October. A couple of days ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu, in a sense, created quite a controversy when he told ABC News in the US that we're going to have security responsibility in Gaza for an indefinite period of time, even after the war. Has he now, in a sense, done damage control by telling Fox News in his latest interview, we don't seek to conquer Gaza, we don't seek to occupy Gaza, and we don't seek to govern Gaza? Because many had thought that Israel was sending out mixed signals, and just today Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president, has said we can take charge of Gaza, but there has to be a broader agreement. What are your thoughts on that? Isn't it correct to say that when you talk about finishing off Hamas, ultimately you will need to have a long-term plan of who you're going to hand over Gaza to if you're convinced that it cannot be Hamas, and you will probably need more moderate elements like the Palestinian Authority to play a bigger role?
Yeah, first, I don't disagree with what you're saying at all. I think that that's reasonable. But the dilemma that Israel faces right now is how do we create a reality so that Palestinians can be our neighbors? Hamas cannot. They've proven it that it's not possible for them to be neighbors. It's not possible for them to take care of their own people. They're not interested in that. They built tunnels, but don't let their own people be protected there. We have to create a reality that changes that paradigm, that creates a possibility for Israelis and Palestinians to start looking at each other as neighbors again. For the 150,000 Israelis that are no longer in their homes to believe that they could live along the border with Gaza next to Palestinians. The way to do that, of course, is to eliminate Hamas. But you're right. Once the war ends, once our refugees, our hostages are home, and our IDPs are able to return to their homes that need to be rebuilt, then we can look at the possibility of how we and the Palestinians can rebuild both on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side. We have to be able to live as neighbors. Hamas cannot be that kind of neighbor.
Hamas cannot be that neighbor. So, Colonel Mario Eisen, let me come to you now. Questions have been asked of Israeli leaders in recent weeks as to what their long-term vision for a post-war scenario in Gaza really is. Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, said we have no interest in controlling life in Gaza. Then, like I said, came the controversial statement from Prime Minister Netanyahu where he talked about being responsible for the security of Gaza for an indefinite period of time. And now in his Fox News interview, he says, no, we're not interested in reoccupying or governing Gaza. And yes, your closest ally, the United States, has been at pains to say it would be a big mistake for Israel to reoccupy Gaza. So if there is indeed clarity in Tel Aviv that we're not going to reoccupy or govern Gaza, then what really is the way forward? Who do you think you can actually hand over Gaza to once, let's say theoretically, you have managed to finish off Hamas or at least its terror infrastructure?
Neha, you're asking the questions that we probably will be asking in Israel at our Shabbat dinners, where most families have all of their families called up, so they're not actually at the dinner table. Because it's a question, it's not an exclamation mark. There are different scenarios that we can look at. Will it be something international? Will it be something Arab? Can we, not Israel, but can the arena that we're in build a different kind of Palestinian leadership? For example, what you were talking about before, also with the ambassador, about a Palestinian leadership based on the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And everything you said before is part in the background. It isn't that there's been a wonderful relationship until now. They are not Hamas terrorists. So when you're looking at that next day, I really want to share with the viewers for a moment why I can't answer that. Because we're still in a war, Neha. We still don't yet know what Hezbollah is going to do. In addition to the hundreds of thousands that have been evacuated from the south of Israel to save their lives, their communities were destroyed. Tens of thousands of Israelis inside Israel were relocated from Israel's northern border. How can I talk about the day after in the Gaza Strip when I want to talk about the destruction of Hamas without bringing into the equation what do you do with Hezbollah and Lebanon? They've been firing rockets at us, mortars at us, anti-tank missiles at us every single day, and we haven't mentioned them once until now, and that's why I can't talk yet about the day after. I'm thinking about it. I understand the importance. I want a better future for the people of Gaza. They deserve it, as you've said. They deserve to not have Hamas, and yet we all understand that Hamas grew out of the Gaza Strip, that it is part of the Gaza Strip. It's very hard to do that disconnect. So when we look at that day after, it isn't just the Gaza Strip. It's the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, but it is also Hezbollah on our northern border who have been pushing us, and then you take that step back and go, wow, that's something even broader. Again, just in the last 2 days, firing of different types of UAVs and rockets, both from Lebanon and from Syria into Israel. Today at lunchtime, I had a siren here in Tel Aviv, and I say that not because, nothing happened, a few people were injured, but Israel has invested in our paradigm that we had the capabilities to defend ourselves against that type of Hamas terrorism. Hamas terrorism changed the equation in the world. And that means that when you look at the next day, we have to make up something new. It can't be the way it was before. And on that one, I say, and it's not just about the not Hamas in the Gaza Strip, it's saying that's also true for our northern border. Look at where we are. What wall can we build that will be high enough? Nothing. They come across and do the atrocities. And I understand in that sense when we're looking, as you're showing the pictures all of the time, of Israeli troops inside, of what we're doing inside Gaza. When we destroy one tunnel, and we've destroyed hundreds, the tunnels are built under Gaza. That immediately means that the building above collapse. The way to get into the tunnel is through the shaft that's from a building. And then you have a secondary explosion and it collapses. And we've been telling people to leave. So I think that the rebuilding of Gaza is definitely something that needs to be done with international participation, not because it's not Israel's problem, but because the Gazans won't accept it from Israel. We need to feel that we are safe, not just from the atrocities of October 7th, but from that feeling that at any stage, people aren't going to want to live there, not on our southern border, not on our northern border. This is not the kind of reality we can live in.
All right, and you're right, of course, this is already in some ways a multi-front war that Israel is fighting. It's not just against Hamas, you have Hezbollah, you have the Houthis that actually downed a US military drone just yesterday. You have Iran. So there are multiple factors there. But since you mentioned something important, that rebuilding of Gaza needs to happen with international participation, the question that I therefore want to put to Ms. Bernstein is, how much longer can Israel hope to have that international support? Isn't that becoming a very tricky issue? Ms. Bernstein, as I said earlier, I just want to repeat for the benefit of our viewers, there are recent polls that have been done in the United States of America, and I keep talking about America because they are your closest and staunchest ally. These polls suggest that Americans are not only deeply divided, on Israel's response to the Hamas terror attacks, many of them, especially the Democrats, and that is President Biden's party, believe that Israel has taken things too far, the response has been excessive, and there are multiple countries now around the world, not just the Arab world, who are beginning to look at Israel's counter-offensive as a genocide of the Palestinian people. Not to mention the fact that these cables that CNN International has reported talk about how the United States is rapidly losing support in the Arabic world. Therefore, my question is very simple. It's been close to 5 weeks now. Are you not concerned that rapidly eroding international support is likely to become a problem for Israel in the days ahead? Could you unmute yourself, please?
We have international support from all the liberal democratic countries, whether it's Germany, France, Italy, US, Canada, and I'll continue. All of them understand that our mission is important, not just for us, but for the entire world. And you hear Hamas leaders saying that Israel is just the beginning. They want Jews all over the world. It sounds like the Nazis, I would say, okay? So once they eradicate Jews in Israel, they'll eradicate Jews from other places. And anti-Semitic is happening all over the world. And yesterday or the day before, a Jew in Los Angeles was murdered in a pro-Palestine rally. So the world is with us. I understand that the streets of US is seeing those scenes that you're showing now, and you hear about the casualties, and it hurts everyone. But you need to look at the big picture, and the big picture is to get rid of Hamas. It will take another month, it will take another 6 weeks. Eventually, the Gaza Strip is not endless, okay? It's a small strip, and the Israeli army is moving slowly but surely, and eventually they'll get to the leaders of Hamas, and then this is over, because once you get the leader, I guess that the rest will surrender. So it will not take that much, but still, we need to allow the military to do their job. They're doing a wonderful job. People have the spirit, and we are in survival mode. You need to understand, October 7th brought us to our old trauma of the Holocaust. And this massacre created some survival. They want to kill us, and they managed to kill so many people. We're not letting them do it again. The never again is this slogan now. And we need to let the IDF, the Israeli military, do their job. I wouldn't say as much as it will take. I assume it will take another few weeks. I hope that now that the civilians move to the south, there will be less casualties, and the only casualties that you will hear about will be Hamas. And also, it's important to remember that Hamas terrorists are also kids. They take kids when they are 12, 13, 14 to work with them. You see the Hamas camps where they take kids at the age of 10 and they teach them how to use a rifle. Kids they showed kids of the Hamas at 15, 16 fighting along Hamas troops. So, and then they call them kids. They are not kids. When someone is a terrorist, no matter how old he is. It's really a pity, of course, but this is ground reality, and the world should understand that that's not a war between democracies. It's not a regular war. It's a war against a terrorist group that has its own rules, and Israel trying to do its best to take care of the casualties and the civilians, of the civilians, not to create casualties.
All right. Now, as we wrap up the last edition of Global Lens this week, I would like to mention that here in India, on this weekend, we are celebrating our biggest festival, Diwali. We call it the Festival of Lights. And as I wish all our viewers a very happy and peaceful Diwali, I would also like to wish our Israeli friends a peaceful time given what happened on your last Jewish holiday. May it never ever happen again. And if I may add, I also hope and pray for peace for Palestinians. We all wish to see an end to this war at the earliest. On that note, thank you so much to all my guests for joining me on the show. Thanks very much.